Welcome to the Why God Why podcast. My name is Peter Englert. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, and we exist to respond to the questions you don't feel comfortable asking in church. Today, we are actually piloting work in progress in our new studio. We do have a group during this recording, so if you hear random yells or screams, that's not us. Ben, maybe it's you. I don't know. Anyways, but we are in the middle of a series called Why Do I Still Follow Jesus? I am here with my friend, Ben Densieski. Did I get
close? That's where Densieski.
You know, I tried, so I had the honor to officiate Ben and his wife's Kelsey weddings this summer, and I always try to remember the 3 syllables. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it on the day.
So
I believe
I nailed it on the day, but not at the podcast.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. It's in that short-term memory loop.
So,
what we say is den. It's like you're going to say zest, but you don't say zest. You just say zeski.
I love it.
For anyone out there.
Well, Ben, it's great to have you. We love it.
Excellent to be here.
So we're in this series, Why Do I Still Follow Jesus? And really, it's about like radical stories of faith. And I think you have a pretty powerful one. Before we jump in, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, you know, I can take it back to the very beginning. You know, I actually, the first church that I attended in my life was Browncroft Community Church when I was just a little kid. So I went to Sunday school here and all these things, right? Grew up in Irondequoit, went to West Irondequoit schools. Transitioned from Browncroft to Bethel Christian Fellowship. Had spent some of my preteen years there. Got involved in sports as I grew older. Loved basketball, played football for a little while. Eventually became a runner, right? I don't know if I'm moving through my younger years too quickly, but that's been the early years. Have always loved history. My family goes on a lot of history-based vacations. And then, eventually graduated from Irondequoit High School, went to Union College. At that time in my life, high school, college, right? I'm not really attending church or going to church regularly, right? Or reading my Bible. And then eventually after that, I spend some time deciding what I want to do. And I end up going to grad school in California, UC Santa Cruz. Go Banana Slugs. Go Banana Slugs.
What a great mascot.
Yeah. It can't be too inspiring for the athletes, but I like it. I like it a lot. And then that kind of takes me to my point where I returned to Rochester. And throughout this time, do you want me to kind of start moving into my testimony, my struggle? Why don't you
just close the loop on like maybe the last 5 years? Just give me a quick update.
Sure, yeah, definitely. Then through a series of events, I end up joining a small group, a Browncroft small group, and I'm attending Browncroft irregularly. And it turns out that my now wife was the leader of that small group, and that's where I met her. So that's I was married this past summer, as you mentioned, which was amazing, and now I am both teaching and I work in local journalism in Rochester.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that little background. So let's kind of start here. If you were to kind of sum up in a word of why you still follow Jesus, what do you think that word would be?
It could be tough to just do a single word, but I would say his promises. His promises.
Can you say a little bit more?
Yes, I can. I have found, for someone who stumbled so far off of the path, right? I accepted the Lord into my life when I was very young. When I was 3 years old, I can remember the moment being in my bedroom alone, right? I think I might have been prompted by a sermon that week, or maybe an Adventures in Odyssey episode. Always good. I don't know if that's still kicking around. Right. But over the course of my young life, over the course of my teenage years and into my 20s, right, I strayed away from God. I rejected, right, what I knew to be true. And when I came back, when I wanted to restart, get back onto, the path with God, right, he was right there. He was right there. Some passage in the Bible that even when I was irregularly attending church, maybe 5 years ago, that the Lord kept bringing me to was Psalm 34. Psalm 34, verse 4, I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears, right? And that word sought, right? We're doing the act of seeking of God, right? And then he is there, right? That deliverance comes right second in that verse, right? So for me, taking that leap of faith to join a small group, really after all these years away from church in general, right, and then it, immediately was met with God's presence, right? And then what's the next step, and what's the next step? And just the fact that his promises, right? I'm not gonna be able to keep my promises as human Ben, right? But God is always going to keep his promises to me, right? The kind of the prodigal son, right? Undeserving of that love upon my return, right? But it's there waiting.
Mm. So let's kind of back up. You go to UC Santa Cruz. You're probably what, 22 or
22, 23.
22, 23. Describe what Ben was like back then, but also describe kind of where you were on your thoughts about God.
Yeah, Ben at that time was always the same, right? Fun-loving, likes to joke around Ben, right? So many of the qualities that I have now, I had then, of course, right? But also I was, in my younger life, my late teens, early 20s, just going through, a lot of pain and a lot of anger, right? And these aren't necessarily because I went through several, I did have things that went on in my own life, right? But it wasn't because I was living in a war-torn country or things like that, right? Very much self-inflicted things, right? And dealing with my anger about the world or my status in life or where I am or where I'm headed, right? In inappropriate ways, right? And turning to substances, drugs, and alcohol, right? In order to combat a lot of these feelings, right? Instead of now, bringing my sorrows and my concern, right, to Jesus, right, or to the foot of the cross, right, I was bringing them to man-made solutions, right, and that not only had a negative effect on my physical health, right, but really had a harsh effect on my spiritual health, right. Those things are counterproductive, right, to well-being. We know that in general, right, but certainly spiritually. Was just in a period of being lost and just dealing with things the wrong way, and at the same time having no real desire in turning back towards the Lord, right? Because my heart had hardened, right, to the church setting, right, to having to follow a narrow path. Right, that narrow path, or the narrow gate that Jesus talks about in Matthew, right? I had no real interest in that, and kind of wanted to live my life my way, right? And seek out the world, I'll say.
If you feel comfortable, be specific with what you were angry at, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners probably were angry at. They are currently angry at similar things.
I'd be happy to.
What time is it? You're immediately like, go on.
Yeah, I was just driving over here, and I was, especially, we're all familiar with, let's say the contemporary United States, right? The past 10 years, what's happened in our country, right? So certainly, politics, injustice, right? Even things that you might consider a noble anger, right? Seeing the inequalities in our world, right? And not really seeing a solution for that, right? Also in my own life, pitying myself, right? I don't make enough money, or I'm not where I should be. I've done all these things. Why isn't everything adding up for me? Right? Why aren't I getting what I deserve? Right? Why, so both external and internal, right? Not seeing the results that I want in my own life, or at least what I think I should be seeing in my own life, right?
Can I just kind of play on that a little bit?
Yeah.
I think you and I are very close in age. And so just as a headline to our topic, I feel like when I grew up in the church, the American dream and the gospel were kind of intermingled, and I don't think anybody did it on purpose. I just think these, like, if you work hard and you go to college, you'll get a job. And, I grew up where IBM was, International Business Machine. And all of a sudden, in 2005, when I graduated high school, 2006, 7, and 8, we go through this huge economic downturn. And it was like, well, just get a job. And it's like, well, it's fairly hard to get a job. And the job that you get, it's not like huge benefits. So were those kind of the things that you were struggling with? I mean, does that resonate with like I've been sold this bill of goods, not necessarily from a person, and you're telling me just do the right things and you can have the American dream.
Yeah, no, I completely identify with that, right? Especially thinking from a generational perspective, right? With the generation that we were raised by, right? There were a plethora of jobs available, right, when you graduated high school. Or I've done a extensive research on Kodak through some of my graduate work, right? And you could just graduate high school and walk down the road and have a sustainable living, right, for the rest of your life, and a retirement plan and healthcare and all these things, right? But now it's a little bit more of a moving target sometimes, right? And I know, translating that to my own teenage years, right, kind of the beginning of my rebellion, right, straight A's meant to me that I could behave how I wanted to, right? I'm performing academically, and that appears to be the measure of success, right? At least at this point in my life, to walk into the next point in my life, right? So as long as I'm performing in that way, right, I'm on a successful path, and the other extraneous things are important. But yeah, thinking about that, right? Thinking about the American dream, right? It's not something that's always possible or something that's always guaranteed, right? Kind of thinking about like the prosperity gospel, right? Like there's actually no guarantee, right, that we will always, be living in the land of plenty, let's say. But kind of from, that worldly perspective, or growing up in the metrics of our success, right? It's like, what's happening? I did everything that I was supposed to do. And where's my harvest? Where's my results? Where's my portion of this, wealth, or, these other things that we hunt for, right? When we're not focused on the Lord.
Okay. I think that's really helpful. And let me, so how long were you in Santa Cruz?
I was in Santa Cruz from fall 2015 to spring 2017.
So tell us, like, what happened when you moved back to Rochester? Like, what were you thinking? What were you feeling?
Well, I mean, on a more basic level, I mean, let's face it, coastal California is beautiful every day. You go outside, or you drive down the road, and it's just like, wow, this is exactly This is exactly what they said it would be. So, so coming back to a colder place, right, is never fun. But also just not having a lot of direction, right? I literally have a master's degree at that point, so I have some professional credibility, right? But what do I actually do with it? What options are on the table for me? So I actually started, just to make money while I was looking for a more full-time job, I did the Instacart grocery shopping, right? So I'm kind of wandering around doing odd jobs, right? And things aren't really going the way that I had expected, right? So just not seeing really the fruits of what I had done, right? As I had done in years leading up to that, really invested a lot of my time in drinking, right? And using different drugs, right? And just really started to fall into kind of a pit, an unsustainable existence, just of self-medicating, right? Of trying to put a Band-Aid on my arm that had fallen off, right? It's just not going to do the job.
So I think that's pretty powerful. And I just appreciate that authenticity. Did you feel isolated when you were kind of going through substances, or, did you have friends that were like, because I think what I'm hearing, and I could be wrong, you go to Union College, which is far away from Rochester. You're a great friend, you're going to Santa Cruz, and I'm sure everywhere you made friends, but there's a part of me that, like, I'm trying to put the connection to your stories. The A+ kid that thinks he can do whatever he wants, which is this odd thing, who's also jovial, who's also kind, compassionate, like every person I talk to that knows you, like salt of the earth, first phone call. And it just kind of seemed like this was an area of your life that, I don't know, it just seemed isolated. Is that a good way to kind of...
Yeah, no, I appreciate you hitting on that, because it's actually integral to what we're talking about, right? The substance abuse kind of arises in a fun environment, right? It starts as maybe on Fridays and Saturdays, you just let off some steam with your friends, right? And then that seems like an effective way to feel better, right? So it can start in that social setting, but then it turns into, what you need on a regular basis, right? To kind of mend your feelings, or put away your anxiety, or put away your stress about the day, right? And then it becomes quite an isolated activity, right? And it's easiest to use and abuse substances when no one's watching, right? When there's no accountability, no other eyeballs, right? So especially, so then it becomes this whole process of hiding everything, right? And it went from something that was, maybe not right, but a more innocent-based fun with your buds, right, to something that becomes a lifestyle of lies and secrecy, right? Living in the shadows, if you will, right? It's a double life in many ways. So a lack of community, right, and really feeling like you're on your own 100% plays into that lifestyle.
And so obviously you felt that.
Yeah. I did. Just a lack of community, right? And also, I'm sorry, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I certainly did feel isolation, right? Even if it was, you have your coworkers at work, right? But, no really intimate connections with other people, right? Or no relationship building, let's say, right? It's just kind of people that are passing by while I'm trying to make myself feel better, right?
So we're going to kind of go in different directions, but I kind of like following the chronologicalness of your life. So you work in media now, and about the same time you start working for media, you all of a sudden find yourself back at church. And to your surprise, maybe, I mean, what were you thinking in the terms of, I'm angry at God, I'm angry at the United States, I'm angry at, you know, the world, so to speak. Hey, let's give a small group a shot.
Yeah, right. It might seem like a wild choice at that time, right? But thinking back to that foundation I had established with God when I was a little boy, right? Even if it was on the farthest burner back in my mind, right, there still was that lingering aspect of, you know, ultimately I think that even though I'm not doing anything associated or related to God, my faith, church, right, I still know that that is the truth, the way, and the life, right? Even if I am not interested in it whatsoever, I still acknowledge that, right? Because that was one of the foundations of my upbringing and my life, right? And I had a close friend, Naomi, who invited me to come to a couple services at Browncroft, right? And although maybe I wasn't in a position where I could fully hear or fully connect with what was going on, right? As soon as I came back, right, just being in worship service really started to melt my heart, right? Because I hadn't been in the presence of a community or with the people of God in his presence, right? So just coming back to church and being in worship services and hearing some of the lyrics in different songs, right? Like you turn graves into gardens, right? Or, you know, Jireh, you're enough, right? Or how much more does he love you, right? Phrases we're familiar with from these songs, right? Because we sing them so much, but coming in cold, right? It's like this is my, you know, I'm in my spiritual grave, right? And there is hope, right? So just the kneading of my heart, if you will, right? Really started when I came back to church, right? And a lot of times in worship, I would just cry, right? I wouldn't even really be able to sing too much. I would just be crying, right? Because my heart had just become so hard, right, to all of these things. But slowly just being poked with love, right? It really coaxed me, or I think coax is the wrong word, but it really brought me to a place where my heart and my spirit were fertile for other things from the Lord, right? So just the act of coming back to church, even though I was like, I don't, you know, am I going to have to give up? Am I going to have to stop hanging out with my friends, or am I going to have to change my entire life? You know, the answer is no, right? But obviously all of these things are reframed by my reinstated relationship with Jesus, right? So I think I tried to go with your question there.
I think that's powerful, because I think what I hear you saying is there are a lot of people that feel like they have to land before they take a significant spiritual step. And I think my concern for millennials and even Gen Z is you can deconstruct or doubt, and a lot of it's legitimate. Like, hey, the church has failed. Like, I'm a pastor. I've failed as a leader, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't at least take a step. And sometimes, like, you'd be surprised at what happens when you just show up to church on a Sunday morning. You're not the first person that said, I walked into church, I heard the music, and I started crying. There's something more kind of going on. So I think that that's powerful. Or were you going to say something, or?
I don't think so, but something that does come to mind as you say that is, I joined my small group in February 2020, right? So it was an interesting time, right, to join a small group, obviously, because we soon were on Zoom, right? But even when we were on Zoom, I was just so excited, right, to get to that Zoom meeting, right? Because it was just so different, right? These people are coming together tonight because they care about each other, right? And they're genuinely interested in each other's well-being because of their love of Jesus and Jesus's love for them, right? That's just so, I think, if we've been Christians for years and years and decades, right, that's so commonplace, right? But that's actually so radical, right? People coming together in the name of love, right? That's not something you just stumble into walking down the street, right? So just the energy that brought to my life, the new purpose that brought, right? Just in a situation where, it says in Psalms, I think it's in Psalms, right? My sin was like a burden too heavy to bear, right? And just feeling new life, feeling new energy, right? In the midst of that, right? There wasn't when I started in my small group, right, I still very much had my foot in that other camp, right, that other life, right, but just feeling this new way, which obviously is in part things of the Holy Spirit working in your life, and it just was a very exciting time.
It's crazy about that. We interviewed Kelsey about your small group, and Kelsey, your wife and small group leader. We interviewed her. I want to say it was like March or April. Well, it had to be more springish because your small group was really just a powerful example of that. I mean, you were Zooming, but you were also going to Food Link and you were finding ways to serve. And I mean, that's just pretty powerful. We're going to come back to that because I have a few questions for you about that. But there's a lot of people that they hear stories about people coming back to follow Jesus. And I grew up Pentecostal, so like I heard it all the time. So someone would be like, I was an alcoholic, I was into drugs, and I came to know Jesus, and my addictions went away, my life got better, I got a job, I got, and then I got married. Knowing you, I think I would almost say, coming to follow Jesus, your life got a lot better. There's specific, but it actually got a lot harder. So talk about that process of kind of you're joining a church, it's the coronavirus, and all of a sudden now you're making some huge spiritual shifts in your life. Yeah, most certainly. Right. Because like I said, I still, even after coming back to church, even after having some of these exciting things going on, right, still, substance abuse and addiction, right, is a physical habit, right? So it's still something that you're battling with every single day. And then we go into lockdown, right? Or, for a while it was lockdown, but certainly even after lockdown, right, it's a limited social world, right, so to speak. So that isolation piece that we were talking about is still ever present, right? If you're hanging out with people, right, you're going on walks, right? You're not really spending time inside or time where you could even really see each other's faces, right? So still this struggle between, what I had self-taught to remedy my life, right? And this new path that seems promising, right? And not a new path, but a path that I'm rejoining, right? That seems promising, filled with energy and love, right? But it's also a challenge in a way, right? Because it means saying goodbye to my former self, right? And, as we know just from our human ways, right? We love ourselves. We love being who we are, right? So kind of pushing the self that I had created out the door, right, was extremely challenging. Right. And I remember, when we were dating, when Kelsey and I were dating, I was so thankful for her as a friend to me at those times. Right. Because I was undeserving of all the care that she gave me. Right. Because I was still acting inappropriately
at times, right? And seeking the wrong fixes to my problems, whether emotional or otherwise, right? So just this battle between these two paths, which eventually, I can after, I guess I could go into what eventually happened, right? As I really came to a place, right? And I guess where this kind of took a foothold was actually doing Rooted, right? Rooted talks about spiritual death, right? Or that when, things go that far astray, how that could occur, right? And it just hit me that that's where I'm headed, right? I know that, maybe, I have this lingering relationship with God from my childhood, right? But I know that, eventually the decisions that I have made will be final and permanent, right? So that's going to lead to my spiritual death, right? And that's a very serious, tragic, terrible thing. And I knew even with my addiction, right? I knew even with all these things that I think were good for me, right? That is not what I want for my life, right? I want to, have a family. I want to fall in love, right? I want all these other things. Not that those are the promises of God necessarily, right? But I knew that there was better for me. Eventually coming to a place where I have to make the really difficult decision to say, I'm putting these substances behind me, right? And it's not an easy decision, right? Because you're giving up your fun, right? You're giving up your high. You're giving up your way to feel good immediately, right? So that is not an easy decision whatsoever. People may look from the outside and say, well, they're objectively bad for you, right? That's just a logical decision, right? It's really not, right? Because it's embedded in your life in so many different, all the strata of your life, right? It's woven its way in. So it's really not easy. But I remember the night that I finally said no, right, which was in August 2021, right? And it's not that, it's not that I went from 100 to 0 on that day, right? But I went to 0, let's say. And it felt so good. It felt so good because I can be honest with the person that I'm in love with now, right? I can go around and not have that cloud above me. But I'm saying all this to say, right, the next month, and you actually reminded me before we sat down here, right, that 2 years ago today I was baptized, right? Mm-hmm. And today's the 18th, today's the 19th, right? September 19th. Right. So finally saying no in August, right. Getting baptized in September. Right. And I was reflecting on this, just the way that I felt sitting in that back hallway after getting baptized, feeling like I had crossed a finish line. Right. Or maybe I was at the starting line. Right. Hard to say, but feeling as though I had passed a threshold of peace. Right. From there, right, and something I didn't know is that throughout this time that I'm abusing drugs and alcohol, right, I had undiagnosed sleep apnea, which was something that Kelsey came to quickly realize when we started dating. She's like, if we watch TV, you fall asleep, like during the day. I'm like, oh, yeah. So anyway, right, shortly after my baptism, I get my CPAP machine. It's just kind of this timing, right? I get my CPAP machine, my health improves, I can function, I can wake up in the morning, right? I can wake up when I need to, right? And then a few months after that, out of the blue in January 2022, I get, contacted, right, saying that there's a need for an adjunct professor in the communication department at Roberts Wesleyan, right? And from there, I've been teaching for the last 4 semesters, right? But thinking about that timeline a little bit, right, and thinking about the importance of the choices that I made that were heavily influenced by the Holy Spirit working in my life, right? That fertility of my heart that I mentioned, right? All of these things, as hard as they were, as hard as that process was, these things started to unfold, right? And bringing back to the beginning of the conversation, his promises, right? His promises, right? I had applied to so many jobs in the past 10 years, right? And getting one or two, right? I had not applied or even shown interest in these adjunct professor positions. And one day they just came, right? So I'm not saying that because I recommitted my life to God, I was offered these things, right? But at the same time, right, there was just returning, right, recommitting my life to God, right? He can open doors in 5 seconds that I couldn't open in 50 years, right? So I've been going on. I'm going to let you.
No. It's super powerful because I'm going to talk as a pastor and a friend now, because I don't think we've had this conversation. We just have a couple thousand people that are listening and watching us. Because when I think about those 2 years, like from, we'll just say August, February 2020 to almost, the start of 22, I think about everything that you went through, kind of a lonely substance abuse process. You do great work for the media locally, here in Rochester. That was not an easy time to cover the media. You were, besides COVID, which rocked us, it's polarizing. We had the Daniel Prude protests, which was polarizing. And as your role as media is to be the front lines, which was not an easy place to be. It was extremely stressful. I mean, part of working in media is the work hours. You have to work when the things are happening. And, a lot of those times, I would see a Twitter post at like 1 o'clock in the morning. So you're going through that. You're dating Kelsey, which is wonderful, but it's a whole, it's a whole new experience. And, just to kind of hear you have that perspective, because I don't think what you and I are saying is, why do I still follow Jesus? Like, and you've said this a couple times, I got married, I got the job, but what you began to realize was like God and his grace was coming to you. Because to me, hearing your story, pretending not to be your friend or your pastor for a moment, it's a miracle you survived those 2 years. Like, it's a miracle. But like, I can see moments that God brought the right people, the right circumstances. I don't know. I'm kind of going off there, but because like, I think it's important for our listeners to piece this all. This was not an easy process for you to decide to follow Jesus. Like, as awesome as Roberts was, there were still really hard news reports that probably resonated with some of your anger at God, at the church. I don't know. Does that right?
Yeah, 100%. And I appreciate you bringing that up, right? Because it was such a tough time to be working in local journalism, local news, right? Just because no matter your political affiliation, right, or your identity, right, you're probably not happy with the news during this time, right? One way or the other, right? So you kind of carry that stigma with you as a journalist. But also just the shift that I work 2:30 to 11:30 in local news, right? In 2020 and 2021, right? We have these soaring homicide numbers in Rochester, right? And I'm kind of on the front lines of that, right? Responding to a lot of these different scenes, right? And seeing the pain, right, that the community is in, right? Or seeing the sobbing mother rush towards the crime tape, right? Also the the social unrest that we had, right, ignited by these situations ending in tragedy between the police, right, and community members, right, resulting in public outcry, right, a lot of emotion, sadness, anger, right, about the state of our society, the way that we operate. And it was extremely challenging to be in those moments, right? I consider it a learning experience, right? And ultimately, I value that I was there, right? Because I was kind of the front lines of what the cultural conversation at that time, right? So it was extremely challenging to be around all of these things that are happening in this time, right? But, ultimately, maybe in some way it helped point me towards God a little, right? Because there's no solution for this, right? The things that were going on, we can, as a society, or as I keep saying the word society, right, as community, as whatever word you want to use, we can apply some level of Scotch tape and a Band-Aid to this, right? But there's no actual solution to this, right? But we know that there is one solution, right? And that's Jesus and his love, right? And his action in our own lives, right? And maybe I'm not even going to be able to have a discussion about Jesus in these situations with people, or not even that I was thinking about doing it at that time, right? But just looking for, Lord, where are you in these things, right? Or having that reflection afterwards, right? Lord, how are you using this experience to transform me, right? I'm not saying that I was actively thinking that at that time, right? But kind of in reflection, right? That's how I think about it a little bit.
Wow. That's just super powerful. I'm going to say something and you tell me if it resonates or if you disagree. So you've mentioned the prodigal son, and how that kind of has an impact on your life. Would you say people loved me back to Jesus? Or would you say something else for a one line?
People loved me back to Jesus. I think that is definitely true, because just the faces that come to me when I think about that question, right? Whether it was my friend who invited me back to church, or Kelsey, who was, before we even were deeply romantically involved, was a friend to me, right? Or someone who really took care of me when I started kind of coming back to Browncroft a little bit was Rebecca Taylor, right? She was a friend to me, right? And somewhere that I felt out of place, right? And eventually we got to know each other better, right? And along that path, right? All of these people who, right? And that's, right, that leap of faith, that step to say, I'm going to join a small group. I'm going to start coming to church, even if irregularly, right? And taking that step, all of these people come into my path, right? And to lend a helping hand, right? Or at least to show me Jesus's love in the ways that they are capable of, right? Or within their sphere of influence, right? To look out. And not, right, like the prodigal son, right, that nobody needed to do that, right? Nobody needed to help me, right? But that's Jesus's love, right, that motivates those actions by others. So I would say that does resonate with me, definitely.
So as we kind of come to a close, this is, I feel like we're just having coffee and we're just recording this. So you talked a lot about the promises of God, and usually what I find helpful is I have to first identify the lie that I believe about myself for the promises of God to resonate. So, I think about, the lies that I believe about myself. I'm only good if I'm producing. And how God is like, I love you just the way you are. Like, I'm not enough. And there's certain lies that I've had to identify. If you could pull out one or two lies that you've believed about yourself? And the truth is, I'm not past the lies I believe about, they rear their ugly head.
Yeah.
What do you think might be those one or two lies, and how did the promises of God, how is that shifting the way you see yourself?
Yeah. So immediately you saying that makes me think about how, right, when our sin really we put ourselves in a box with our sin, right? And the shame of our sin kind of keeps us there, right? And then those lies start to emerge, right? I'm not good enough for this, right? Or I'm just a stupid alcoholic, right? I'm just going to keep making bad decisions, right? Or, I'm never really going to end up with somebody that loves me, right? Because I'm out of shape, right? And I'm spending half my time trying to just seek worldly pleasure, right? None of these things are going to come to me, really. I might as well just stay with what I'm doing, right? And just repeating myself, the shame, right? That you let dwell over you, right? And shape you, and it creates boundaries around you, right? And what you're willing to think is possible, right? Or it keeps in place those lies about yourself. Yeah. And as you mentioned, right, still something to be worked through on a daily basis, right? Things that we can seek out, right? The truth that counters that, right? In God's word, right? In prayer, right? In all these different ways, that we can have, work on our relationship with God, right? Really helps us punch out the walls of that box, right? And say, no, I am who God created me to be, right? These are falsehoods.
So I'm going to push you a little bit for the promise, but so I think one of the things that I've had to learn, is I've had to say, God is particularly fond of me. I can resonate with God loves me, but that there's a duty and commitment. But the problem, like God likes you. Maybe some other promises is God's present. Maybe it is, you've said love a lot. Maybe it is God loves you, but what's the promise or a couple of the promises that you said back there to kind of combat, you said, I'm just a stupid alcoholic. I can never have this life. I mean, when you think back, what was the one or two promises that really resonated and brought you back?
I mean, when I think of God's promises, right, I think of our salvation, right? The fact that, right, no matter what I did, right, as the prodigal son, no matter what I did, wasting money, wasting time, focusing on the wrong things, right, God's promise of my salvation remains unbroken. And whether I was willing to return or not, God was there keeping his end of the promise. And that's really what comes to mind for me. Do you want to push me more on that? I'm trying.
No, I think that that's a great answer. Yeah. And I think even hearing you say that the promise was, the invitation was always there, and I love the way the Jesus Storybook Bible that we read to our daughters says it, that the Father was waiting every single day. And you think about that, what do you do with someone that's really angry and it's really hurt? You don't come and combat them and be like, well, you think this the wrong way. No, you actually sit with them. And the shocking part of that story is, the Father doesn't even say anything, comes and hugs. So I don't know. I think that that's pretty powerful what you just said.
Yeah. I feel hugged. I feel hugged. Right. And that's, there's a kind of a lightheartedness to that. Right. But also, right, through this process, right? I have just felt the embrace of God, right? And that doesn't mean that while you're in that embrace that everything is going to be perfect, right? And your life's going to unfold exactly the way you want on a day-to-day basis, right? But it does mean that you're tightly in his grasp, right? And within his love, right? And no matter what happens, he is there with you.
Mm. That's a pretty powerful place to close this conversation. Ben, where can people find you if they want to follow you?
I am on Instagram and Twitter. If you search Ben Densieski, I should appear. Yeah, those are my two main handles. You can find me walking around the South Wedge, right in the Highland Park, yeah, among other places, right? Or I'm always looking for a good eatery, right? So if you do see me, please feel free to say hello. I'm more than happy to speak with you.
Say hello and buy him a good cup of coffee. How
yeah,
about that?
Please, yes.
You can find us at whygetwhypodcast.com. You'll get this and every great episodes. Thank you so much for joining us.